Hi class, I'm going to go over the unit on classification and what is life. So this is just a very quick review of what we talked about in class. So please use this if you've been absent or dozing off or you lost your notes or you just need some review. Okay, first of all, we defined life, and this is a little tricky, defining life. We look at characteristics that life forms have on Earth, and they all share a very small collection of characteristics. One of the main things is the building block for life on our planet. So the building block for life on our planet is cells, right? So all life has cells, so that's number one. And there were characteristics of cells. All cells, it doesn't matter if we're talking about bacteria or cells in iguanas or eyes or elbows, but all cells are going to have DNA. All cells are going to have a membrane. That membrane is composed of lipids, phospholipids, and the chemistry of those phospholipids is the same across all life forms. Cells also all have ribosomes. Ribosomes are very large molecules made up of RNA and proteins, and this is where proteins are made. The code for that protein is the DNA. Also, all cells consist mostly of water, and it's in a jelly-like substance called cytoplasm. Okay, oops, sorry for the kind of difficult. Cytoplasm. Alright, so this is one main characteristic of all life forms, is this building block, or cells. Alright, so let's go over another one. Okay, another characteristic of life, this would be number 2, is all living things have to maintain homeostasis. And what homeostasis means is maintaining a state, a relatively steady state that the cell can function at. So even though the environment may change, there's some range of conditions that's maintained within the organism. Okay? So an example of this may be, for instance, for us, maintaining a core body temperature, and when we sweat, water evaporates, cooling our skin. That's a way that we can maintain homeostasis. When we shiver, that also raises our core body temperature. But there can be other things. It can be, for instance, plants. If they get too hot, they're going to close stomata. You can have amoeba in a pond. They're going to turn away from pollution. They're going to turn away from water that's too acidic. All of that is sort of to protect the cell, to protect life. That's maintaining homeostasis. And that's going to bring us to number 3, which kind of goes along with this. Okay, number 3. Number 3 is going to be that all life forms have, in some degree or another, they respond to stimuli. Okay, they respond to stimuli. So, for instance, if you put your hand on a hot stove, you're going to pull away your hand. So you're responding to something hot that can damage your cells. Okay, so the stimulus is the heat, and your response is to jerk your hand away. That's the response. But all living things do this to some extent, even things that we don't think move around. For instance, plants. Plants are going to not grow roots in areas where they're not able to absorb nutrients. For instance, where there's very little water, there's going to be root growth towards areas where the plant's going to be able to get those things. Okay, so all living things do this. And number 4. Okay, number 4. We talked about in class all living things grow and all living things reproduce to some extent. Okay, this may not be much if you're a bacteria, but it's something. Okay, and then number 5, all living things to some extent show some sort of adaptation to their environment. That means that they have traits that fit, or traits that seem to help them survive in a particular environment. Okay, for instance, polar bears, they have thick fur because they live in a cold area. Okay, and then last but not least, and this is actually one of the more important ones, all living things need energy, and they're able to transform energy. Okay, that process of transforming energy is called respiration. Cellular respiration, which means you take food and you convert it to a molecule that you can use for energy in the cell. That molecule is called ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. All cells do this. It doesn't matter what we're talking about, bacteria or iguanas. Okay, and one of the last things that we had talked about in class, a defining characteristic of life on this planet, and this is not all life, but this is multicellular life, meaning life that has more than one cell, is that life, if you have more than one cell, is going to show some degree of organization. Okay, not all the cells are going to be the same. You're going to have specialization. Whoopsies. Okay, but I don't think this is a fair one to put on the main list because, for instance, bacteria, most of our planet is bacteria, and it's a single-celled life form, a very successful one, but it doesn't show any specialization because it's only one cell, so there isn't specialization within cells. But if we think about cells, if your multicellular cells are arranged in tissues, okay, that means cells with similar jobs. For instance, your liver cells do something different than your kidney cells. Tissues are arranged in functional unit called organs. Then you have organ systems. They would be an organism, etc. Okay, so with our definition of life, we can assume that some things which we may think have some of these characteristics, but they don't fit all of them, would not be considered living things. For instance, viruses. So this is a virus right here. This is actually the HIV virus. A virus is not made of cells. This doesn't look like a cell. What this is this is a protein coat. These are proteins with a very specific shape on the protein coat. And inside there would be some DNA or RNA, and there is not water. ATP is not being made. There's no respiration in a virus, hence a virus is not considered a living thing. But we all know that viruses do reproduce, so they have some of the characteristics of living things, but not all. But for this reason, since they're not made of cells, we don't consider them true living things, although my guess is that will change and they may get a special kind of status and a new kingdom, but not yet. Okay. So the energy source for life on our planet is the sun, right? Okay, so probably don't really have to write that. Okay, so it's one of the laws of thermodynamics that energy is always being used, and as energy is used, energy dissipates into a lower form, so it becomes less and less usable. But we don't ever run out of energy on our planet because it's always being renewed by the sun. But the only thing that can use the energy from the sun would be photosynthetic organisms. Now there are whole ecosystems that do not rely on the sun, and those ecosystems are at the bottom of our ocean, and they rely on heat from inside of the earth, from basically geothermal heat. And I showed you a video, the link is here, but I showed you a video in class on those deep sea life forms. And they are completely not reliant on the sun, and one theory is that life on our planet started there. Okay, we talked a little bit about size. How big is a eukaryotic cell, a prokaryotic cell, a virus? The measurement that we use for cells, remember we're going to use metric all the time in class, but we use basically micrometers. I showed you this link on size of cells. Micrometers are abbreviated as a mu and an m. These are 1/millionth. Oops, not sure I spelled that right. Of a meter. Okay? So when we talk about most cells, we're talking about micrometers. Now when we go smaller, when we go into parts of cells and also some bacterial cells, we need to go smaller than micrometers. And now we're going to be talking about nanometers. Okay, nanometers are very small. You abbreviate nanometers as nm. And here we're talking about 1/billionth. Oh, the spelling is not right. 1 billion. Ugh. I am sorry. Okay. 1/billionth. There should be an I there. Blah. Of a meter. Okay. Alright. You should be able to chart the 6 kingdoms of life. Okay. We did something in class. Let's see. I'm not going to be able to see the whole thing here. But this should be linked. Try to get this smaller. Okay, you should have a table that has the 6 kingdoms of life, and it should have characteristics of all of them. Okay, so we went over that in class. Very quickly, the 6 kingdoms of life are, we have 2 bacterial kingdoms. We have what's considered the ancient bacteria or the archaebacteria. Okay, archaebacteria. We also have what's considered the true bacteria. I just say it's bacteria, or sometimes we put a true, EU, eubacteria. Okay, these are our 2 bacterial kingdoms. They're in separate kingdoms because their evolutionary origin is quite different. Their DNA is very, very different, the codes of their DNA. Okay, and then we go into cells that have a true nucleus. And the first kingdom here is Protoctista. Some people just call this the Protist kingdom. We have the fungi, and we have plants, Plantae, and we have Animalia. That's the one you're all familiar with. Okay, so these all have a true nucleus. Their DNA is enclosed in a nucleus. These cells are bigger, and we call these the eukaryotes, meaning they have a true kernel or a true kernel, true nucleus. These don't. These are the earliest forms of life, and these were on the planet long before eukaryotes. Pro means before. This is before the kernel. You can think of a prologue as in the beginning of a book, but these were on the planet for 3 billion years before any eukaryotes. So, and most of our planet actually is bacteria. So believe it or not, these guys are the most important. Okay. We reviewed the kingdoms, but this is one kingdom that we'll spend some time with because this is a one that everybody has trouble with. But the kingdom Protoctista, these are still very small things, but they have a nucleus, and we can see them very easily underneath the microscope. So when we see things swimming in water, like amoeba, paramecium, diatoms, which are photosynthetic, these are all protists. Some other things are protists too that are actually very big. The sea kelps, all the algae are protists. They are not in the plant kingdom because they do not have their cells are cenocytic. They don't have membranes between their cells often, and they have chlorophyll that's different from land plants. And here is a slime mold. You see these a lot in the fall, and they decay off in woods. You often see them in mulch. But slime mold, sea, kelp, all the algae, all the little swimmies that you can see easily underneath the microscope, these are all protists. That ends part 1.